A while back I rebuilt my carburetor and the car still runs, so basically I'm an expert. And today I've got two very sorry looking carburetors in dire need of rebuilding. This one's not got any parts in it, it's basically just the casting. And this one has parts in it, like for example broken half of the venturi. So yeah, today I'm going to try and fix these up, get these running, maybe even test them on my own car just to make sure they work all right, and hopefully you can profit a little from that. Now before I start with this, if you're looking for a professional, well-made, well-understandable, thorough video on how to restore one of these carburetors, then look for Ford Model A Carbs Zenith on YouTube. You'll find a video from the 1970s, and it doesn't just have very nice music in it, but it also shows you how to properly restore a completely junk carburetor, build up everything in it and bring it back to factory spec essentially. I learned a lot from this video, and all you see me do here is basically copy their instructions. Step one, let me see if I can punch this sucker out of here.
"20 minutes later."
And there we go. Now we can remelt this stuff and make another venturi out of it. Another interesting find. There's the rest of the sieve. More fun awaits us. There's a broken off jet right in there. So I'm going to drill it open a little bit more, see if I can get it with an easy out, and if not, then I'll just drill it all the way through and see if I can tap the rest. Problem with easy outs is they spread the stuck piece open, and yeah, that's what's happening here. So before I break that off, I'm just gonna say screw it and drill it open all the way. So I got a few bits and bobs here, remnants of the jet extracted. The issue now is that the threads still aren't fully uncovered.
At any rate, that is what we are going to try to do.
After a little wire wheeling, this looks rather presentable now. Just make sure that all the little ports and holes and connecting passages are free. Like for example, there's one right here, which acts as a vent for the float bowl. And then there is, for example, one right in here. That's the idle passage. And it goes right down and meets up with this one here. So you can blow compressed air through here, you can drill that peg out and then, you know, route around there with the drill. I'm also going to dunk this in some lacquer thinner and leave it there just for everything to soak, and then blow it nice and clean. You know, all these passages, they may be clean enough for air to pass through now, but once it hits gasoline, that's going to act as a solvent, and I don't want to have, you know, resolulated rust chunks and grease and dirt and grime clogging up my freshly rebuilt carburetor. Just for a comparison, this is what the bottom piece looks like. I mean, it's just... yeah, ran when parked. This is going to be a lot of fun to get all the stuck brass fittings out of this rust. I hope I can salvage a few of them, because my suspicion is that they are still original Ford, and usually they are good quality because they have already been flow tested, and I know that the holes in here are reamed and not drilled, so therefore they are round and not triangular shape. I'll see what I can do. So the main jet came out no problem. I've just got the, this jet here, which goes in the float bowl to break loose as well. The secondary well is very well stuck. And the gas adjust stuff here doesn't budge either. The compensator jet is stuck too. However, before I move to heat and flame, I want to try a little trick here, because all I can reach in here with is just a pair of needle nose pliers. However, what if I drilled a socket which can slide over there, and then drilled an elongation which can slide over there, and then try it the usual way, you know, just with a socket and a bit of luck. And I think we are indeed lucky.
The raindrops seem to play a sweet refrain, though spring is here, to me it's still September. That's September in the rain. To every word of love I heard you whisper.
Well, that came apart like nobody's business. Nothing a little barbecue can't fix, right? Almost forgot one. Down in here there is of course a jet. And wow. Now we can check if everything's 3. So you've basically got a bunch of channels in here. The one from the gas adjusting valve, it goes into the bowl, it goes into the idle secondary well chamber, and it goes to the main jet. So by plugging each individual ones like a flute, you can make sure that all the channels are being reached. And then of course this one connects to the main jet, and I think that's about it.
The raindrops seem to play a sweet refrain, though spring is here, to me it's still September. That's September in September in the rain.
quite a big part of the show was going to be drill out and rebush the bearings for the throttle shaft. See, I've made myself a very special fixture here to clamp this thing on the lathe and drill it out, ream it out precisely. However, if I take a throttle shaft and insert it in here and wiggle it around, there is no appreciable amount of play in either of these. As a matter of fact, this one, if you take a close look, it has already been bushed out before. So there's really no point in doing this, you know, with the risk of making it worse always in the back of my mind. So I'm not going to do this. Show you a couple of pictures of when I did the same thing to my very carburetor. And last not least, I'm going to take two throttle shafts and modify them so that I can put an O-ring over these. When these should wear out, that it's still going to seal off nicely. Well, I've taken out all the jets and I've got a set of reamers ready because I've built me this contraption here, which basically is a tube hooked up to a water hose, and there is a T-piece in the bottom. The end here has an M5 by 0.8 thread, I think, in it, and with this thing here you can allow flow to it or not, and it's currently filling up this with water so that I have a fixed height, i.e. fixed pressure, to flow test the jets with. There we go. It's just cracked barely open so that it can, you know, flow over a little bit, compensate what gets lost with the jets later on. And then I'm just going to put a cup under it and measure a minute. Do that 3 times and, you know, do the arithmetic mean of the 3. And then we should know if our jets are too large or too small. Most of the jets actually had an okay flow rate. I didn't have to do anything to them. A few needed to be reamed out, and this handful here is too large. To get it smaller again, I'm going to just use a flame and some lead solder, and then we're going to ream it back open. Every one except this one, which is a very poor reproduction. You can see maybe that this one here has a line where a second part, the jet, has been pressed into this tube. This one hasn't. They just folded the end of the tube over, and as a matter of fact this hole is so much too large that I doubt a solder would even fill that. You can see that the size of the chamfer here is approximately the same size as the hole is in this one. So I'm not going to bother, I'm just going to throw that one out and deal with the rest. I don't have any number drills, so I used a flattened gramophone needle as a starter drill to just poke a tiny little hole into the solder. And now I'm using a known good jet as a gauge to tell me how far roughly I can go to get me into the ballpark of the orifice size.
One flow test later.
And that's it, done. All jets are tested. Word of caution, you have to be very careful with these reamers. Sometimes one turn is all it takes to get from, say, 150 to 160 milliliters a minute. It's really not much. So here's what it takes to fill one of these up. I'm missing one of the sieves here, so I'm just going to use this blanking plug instead. Usually they look like this. That's going into the other carburetor. Never really done this before, completely, so I'm just going to figure out what I do when as I go. We've got an original Zenith float. This one even says Ford on it. It's going into the other one, which sits right over there. Venturi, we need a new one for both. As for cosmetics, I'm just using old parts because they are still fine. They might not look as pretty, but they'll do their job. And we'll see performance-wise when this is all in the car. Alright, I think I know what I'm doing now, starting up with number 2. I'm going to start with the bottom piece this time and put all everything into it that it needs. We're going to start with the jets, shall we say. Off camera I have already tested that all the passages are clear. I flushed them with brake clean. The cap jet of course gets a washer and then gets inserted into the slanted bore at the side. Then comes my special modified nut driver. And in it goes. Snug but not overly tight because it's just brass. It'll seal anyways. Then from the bottom we can insert the main jet. Same thing, snug, not too tight, like so. And then we can follow that up with the drain plug. I prefer the steel ones because brass likes to strip when you do this a couple hundred times. Then comes the secondary well. Make sure that all the holes here are free. Insert that. Then we've got these two very similar looking jets here. The one with the larger opening goes into the gas adjustment valve portion here. Snug but not too tight. There we go. And then the smaller one goes into the float bowl. There we are. Now comes the gas adjusting valve in itself. Depending on how worn out the threads in here are, these are tapered I think, you may have to put some Teflon tape in here to actually make this snug up. These two carbs didn't need that. You can see this locks up nicely now. And you can, by the way, adjust how stiff the needle is by threading this further in or out. On the carburetor that is in my car, I did actually have to put some Teflon tape on here because the things would just bottom out without ever getting snug. Next step will be the choke driver and choke plate. So this thing here will move up and down in correlation with the choke plate. Choke shaft looks like this. It's like the throttle shaft, but without the doohickey here, and it's longer. And also if you check diameters, then this is a whole lot smaller than the throttle shaft. With the choke plate you'll need a little bit of imagination. When you take a very good look at it, then you notice it's not stamped straight but at an angle. Same as with the throttle plate. And since when you pull the choke to close the inlet here, this gets rotated like this, you can see that you want the throttle plate, the choke plate to seal off slanted like this. All I want to say is the camera can't pick up what I'm trying to explain, but you want this thing to sit flush with the angled surfaces when the choke is pulled. You'll have to do a little bit of thinking there. I like to put a dab of grease onto this. Many people don't, and I completely understand that because it's going to be gone within probably minutes or so, but my inner monk is satisfied then. Insert this choke plate and have the screw holes facing you with the chamfer towards you. And once the screws are loosely in place, I can then tap on this to make the choke plate seat, so that it's not off center but it's very nicely centered in the bore here. Now we can put on this little doohickey. Beautiful. Oh yeah, we can put the venturi into here if we wish. On the other one it was a rather tight fit in the top, so I inserted it in the top and then put everything on here, but this is a nice sliding bit, so we can leave it in the bottom. And then we can also put the gasket on here, you know, just so we don't forget it later. Move on to the top part. I'm going to pull out the throttle shaft, put some grease onto it, and then insert it so that the idle adjust actually rides against the pin. Now the throttle plate. It has an 18½ stamping. I like to put that where you can read it, so it's facing the top. And then once again the slanted sides have to be in a way so as to allow the carburetor throat to be sealed completely, and this doesn't sit at an angle. Same as with the choke plate, put the screws loosely into place first, and once they are in there, seat the choke plate by tapping. And then for starting purposes, to give you a rough idea where you're at, I like to turn the screw until it's touching the pin here, and then give it like a turn and a half, 2 turns, something like that, so it's slightly open. We've got a float valve here. I like to make sure to blow into the one end and hold it shut. Put the float pin through here and have the float hang on it, and then look at it from the side. Does it look vertical to you? This one is pointing, putting it in extremes like this. So we're going to have to use a thinner gasket to make this vertical. And there you go. Now you can see that the float sits completely vertical. You can also check that with a ruler and go around here and measure against the solder seam and see that it's an even distance. I think it's supposed to be 1 inch if you go by Les Andrews. And we can install the idle jet here, the filter screen, probably use a gasket there as well, and the idle air screw. This assembly consists of the screw itself, a spring and a cupped washer. close it all the way down. Make sure that it's actually the seat that it seats against and not just the spring being completely collapsed. And then open it up a turn and a half or so. Put the top onto the bottom. And now I like to use a little bit of copper anti-seize on these threads. Especially if you're the kind of guy that has to periodically open up his carburetor just to make sure everything's alright, when really it's the ignition. And here again, do not over tighten. That's all it takes. And with that, we've got ourselves a complete carburetor. I've noticed that the old choke driver on this carburetor is pretty worn out. It likes to slip out of adjustment with the pull yoke here. So I'm going to drill this out and solder a new plug into here. So the next step is to throw these on the car and see how they're doing.